Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and more importantly, welcome to the second great dongle fondle. Yes, we're back with another round of fondling of dongles, and if you haven't seen the first dongle fondle, what this is all about is that when I get sent a bunch of different dongles for review, like I have here, I compile them all into a single video like this, where I can compare them, discuss the differences, and share with you my thoughts on all of them at once. Of course, I can't cover every single dongle on the market, particularly in a single video, so if the dongle that you're looking for isn't covered here, do check out the original dongle fondle, or let me know down in the comments if there's another dongle that you want me to fondle. For now though, let's jump in and take a look at the second great dongle fondle, to dongle to fondle.
I see you looking like a snack, let me see some. You are the wifey type, baby you could be one. Let me change your life, I could show you many reasons, different seasons. Hop in my bag and I stay in it, hit from the back and I stay in it. He is not damn, don't play with him, she is not damn, don't play with her. I got a R-O-D, she got a P-N-C. Baby girl, you know you was made for me. Hop in my bag and I stay in it, hit from the back and I stay in it. He is not damn, don't play with him, she is not damn, don't play with her. I got a R-O-D, she got a P-N-C. Baby girl, you know you was made for me. Hopping away and I stay in it, I beat it up, I don't play in it. I bust it up, then lay in it. Let's go again, you okay with it? I'm parked up, valeting it. Shoot my shot and I'm draining it. I'm Steph Curry, ain't playing this. I don't know what you cost, but I'm paying it. All options, I'm weighing it. If I'm going in, I'm staying in. A king bag, come laying it. Day and night, it's the way of life.
Let's get ready to fondle!
Alright, so jokes aside, when I started putting together this particular review, the thing that struck me as I went through and made my notes is that all of these have a lot in common. As I move through, other than a big price difference in one case, a different set of DAC chips in another case, and the fact that we've got a very different form factor in another case, in all other ways in terms of the specifications, the capabilities, generally speaking the power outputs, all of these on paper look almost identical. They also tout great measurement figures, and so measurement-wise and technicalities-wise, it started to look like we've reached the age of irrelevance when it comes to which dongle you choose. And so I was curious to see as I moved my way through these if there was really anything separating them sonically, or if they're all pretty much interchangeable. To get things started, what I'm going to do is move through the range of dongles I've got in front of me, starting with the cheapest to most expensive, and share with you the key technical specifications, any design quirks that they've got, and then we'll get to the sound quality comparing all five. The first cab off the rank is the HiBy FC4, and this one comes in at $99 US, and I want to say a huge thanks to HiFi for sending this unit out. Just to quickly cover this off once, there are no kickbacks, no deals, there's no influence over what I'm going to say. All of these retailers and manufacturers have just sent me these units for my honest and transparent review, which as always I will share with you. There will be some links down in the description below that may contain affiliates, things like Amazon links. I've got affiliations with HiFi as well, but as you'll see from this review, and as you'll know if you've watched my other reviews, just because there's an affiliate attached doesn't mean I'm going to say good things. There are plenty of examples here on the channel where I've reviewed products that have been sent to me by an affiliate that I've then said bad things about. So with that said, and that applies to everything in front of me here, let's talk about the FC4. This one comes in at $99 US, and it comes in a pretty standard looking design. It's a thin bar style device, it's a bit thicker than some, but narrower than others, and it gives you some pretty basic but good features and functions. At one end, we've got a USB-C socket. At the other, we've got a 3.5 and a 4.4mm output, so this is a balanced dongle. And then on the side, we've got a pair of volume buttons, up and down of course. On the inside of the device, we've got a pair of ES9218 PC chips, and whilst I don't get too hung up on which chip is which, it's always interesting to see a dual DAC design. What I mean is we've got two different chips, meaning one's handling the right channel and one's handling the left channel. That often translates into better channel separation, and therefore better sense of detail and clarity and stage size, etc. I'll talk more about those features later on when we get to the sound quality, but it was interesting to see a dual DAC design at $99 US. The other things the FC4 offers are MQA playback, DSD256, and high sample rate PCM should you care about those things. Probably the biggest party trick for the FC4 other than its price tag though, is the power specifications. This little dongle will output 340 milliwatts into 32 ohms. And to put that into perspective, if you've got a pair of HiFi and Aria stealth versions, you need roughly 10 milliwatts to get to dangerous listening levels. So this has 30 times what you need for safe listening levels on the HiFi and Aria. That means you could probably drive a pair of Susvaras effectively with it, and whilst I'm not recommending it from a quality point of view, the power output is absolutely phenomenal. If you've watched the channel for a while, you'll know that that on its own is not enough for me to say a product is worthwhile, because more power doesn't equal better sound. The quality is still very important, and we'll talk about that soon. Before we get there though, let me introduce the next contender, and that's the Moondrop Moonriver 2. The Moonriver 2 comes in at $190, making it double the price of the FC4, and for your money you're getting a very similar sort of footprint, but the actual design is very different, and I think it kind of looks like someone's half-finished or broken 3D printing job. I really don't like it. The reason for that is not the look of it, I think it's quite interesting to look at, it's the feel of it. It doesn't feel particularly good in the hand, it's got a lot of sharp edges and corners on it, and if you do have to sort of hold it, it doesn't just fit well. There's a bit that's angled here that your thumb sort of wants to go to, but then it's got a rough stepped edge that kind of catches on your thumb. I really don't like the design. That's very personal, so I'm not here to judge that and review it for that. I just thought I'd share it for those that have seen it and wondered how it feels in the hand. My answer is not great. Also, I think in the pocket, there's too many sharp edges that could catch on things, scratch things, rip a hole in your pocket. I'm not a huge fan of the design, as I said. Before I go any further, I should say thank you to Shenzhen Audio, who sent me the Moondrop Moonriver 2. And then I want to tell you about what makes this different from every other dongle in this review. And that is that unlike the others which are using ESS chips, the Moonriver 2 here is using a pair of CS43918 chips. Of course, there's a lot more to the sound of a DAC than which DAC chip it uses, but in my experience, the DAC chip itself does have some influence. There's a certain flavour that does carry through. I generally find that the ESS chips have their sound, the AKM have their sound, and then the Cirrus Logic have theirs. I'm not suggesting for a second that I could describe or pick blind which sort of DAC chip I was listening to, but the fact that the Moonriver 2 was using a pair of Cirrus Logic chips did have me expecting it to sound a little bit different from the others in this roundup. A few other things to talk about with the Moonriver 2 are that it will also handle high bitrate PCM and also DSD256. It won't do MQA as far as I can tell, and that's often something that's reserved for the ESS chips rather than the Cirrus Logic. Just like the FC4 before it, that being the HiBy FC4, the Moonriver 2 also provides you with a 4.4mm and a 3.5mm socket, so this again is a fully balanced unit. It's got volume controls on one side and a USB-C socket on the other end, so becoming pretty standard for most dongles these days. In terms of power output, the Moonriver 2 doesn't have any particular milliwatt outputs that I saw anywhere, but instead what they do is they quote maximum output as 2 volts to 3.5mm and 4 volts through the 4.4mm output. What that translates to is outputs that are nowhere near as powerful as the FC4, but still plenty powerful enough for most headphones you're going to use them with. And one of my tests for all of these dongles was I ran a pair of ZMF 300 ohm headphones from them, and all of them were completely fine with plenty of volume to spare. So power is really no issue for any of these devices. One final thing I want to mention about the Moonriver 2 before we move on is that I have seen some reports of it not working well with certain Apple devices. I can confirm that it worked perfectly for me with Windows and also an Android phone, but if you are an Apple user and you like what I have to say about the Moonriver 2, then it is worth checking out some other information, confirm that it will work with your device before you take the plunge and buy one. But no doubt you'll also want to know how it sounds before you make that decision, so let's move on to the next introduction so we can get to the sound as fast as possible. The Khadas Tea is a very unique looking device in this roundup because it's a very, very flat and broad device. The reason for that is it's designed to magnetically attach to the back of iPhones and MagSafe devices. If you're not an iPhone user, you can buy a little ring that sticks on the back of any normal phone case, so long as it's not silicone. The beauty of this though, as I understand it, is that if you are an Apple user, you don't need to do anything except put it to the back of your phone and it sticks there all by itself. The Khadas Tea retails for $200 and I want to say a huge thanks to minidisc.com.au for sending this out for me to review. The tea is quite unique in this roundup for quite a few reasons, so let me step through them. The first is that it's one of the few devices in this roundup that uses just a single DAC chip, and we'll talk about whether that matters shortly when we get to sound quality. But the other key thing going for it, other than the form factor of course, is that it also has Bluetooth capabilities, including LDAC, aptX HD, so all of the high-res codecs, as well as your standards of course as well. But that means that you can attach this to the back of your smartphone, whatever sort of smartphone it is, and essentially give yourself an easy headphone output via Bluetooth if you want to, or you can use the short USB-C cable that comes with the device. It is worth noting that it has a single-ended only output, so this is the only device in the roundup that doesn't have balanced. But beyond that, it's pretty similar internally in terms of the internal specifications. And what I mean by that is it's got a maximum power output of 2.5 volts, and that translates into, say, 20 to 21 milliwatts into a 300 ohm load, which is plenty, or 165 milliwatts into a 32 ohm load, which is even more than plenty. So you're going to have no problems driving any normal portable style headphone from the T, even though it's single-ended. 3 other things I want to mention in relation to this is that it says in the specifications that it's rated for 32 to 300 ohm headphones. And so I did some quick testing to see if the output impedance of the 3.5mm socket might potentially affect the frequency response of low impedance balanced armature design headphones or earphones. And what I found was no particular variation from the T compared to all the other dongles in this roundup. And so whilst it's rated for 32 to 300 ohms, I don't think you're going to have a problem if you need to run a lower impedance IEM or headphone from this unit. The other 2 things I want to mention is that because this has got Bluetooth, it also handles Bluetooth calling. It does have microphones built in, but I haven't tested that calling function, so check around for some other reviews if you care about the call quality on this one. I needed to focus entirely on sound quality across all 5 of these units. And then the final thing I want to mention is that it handles DSD256, as they all seem to, high sample rate PCM, and also MQA once again. So this is once again a good option for Tidal users, and that's once again because we've returned to using an ESS DAC chip. This is a single DAC, not a double DAC, and that makes sense because it's a single-ended output. So I'm going to put this one down now. Before I do, I should mention you've again got volume controls on the T, and this one's also got a power button, of course, because it's got its own internal battery for the Bluetooth functionality. So let's put this one down now and fondle our next dongle, which is the Shanling UA5. The UA5 here comes in at $235 US, and I want to say a huge thanks to HiBy Go for sending me this one. The UA5 has a couple of very unique features for it here that may or may not translate into it being relevant compared to the others, but let me tell you a bit about it. The most obvious thing you've probably already seen is it's got a little volume control here, but that's not just a rotary volume control, it's also a press button that allows you to access a menu. There's also this black stripe here, which when powered up is an OLED display, and that's going to show you things like the volume, the sample rate, the gain level. Yes, this has got switchable gain, but it also gives you the ability to choose the filters being used by the DAC and also play around with the internal battery. So this is not technically a battery powered dongle in that it doesn't power up if you don't have the USB connected. But what it does have is an internal battery that can isolate the audio components within the device from the noisy power coming from your phone or your USB socket on a computer. And so there's a few different ways you can use the UA5. You can have it running entirely in battery mode, just taking data through USB for the sound. You can also have that same data only mode but charging the battery, or you can have it running like a normal dongle where it's charging the battery and powering the device entirely from USB. So obviously if you'd run out of battery power entirely, the idea is it doesn't make the device useless, but theoretically, and we'll test this later, the optimum sound quality should be from battery only power with only data coming through the USB. So that's pretty unique and cool, but it's not where the Shanling's tricks end. It's also the only one here that handles DSD512 if you care about that, and it also handles high sample rate PCM, but not MQA. And I think that's probably because it's using the ES9038Q2M chips, whereas all of the others are using different chips such as the ES9218 or the ES9281. Finally, it's worth mentioning that the UA5 is also very, very powerful, not quite to the level of the FC4, but it does deliver 210 milliwatts into 32 ohms. So once again, way more power than you're going to need for any normal headphone. It's probably borderline on whether it could effectively drive a Susvara, but for pretty much everything else, it's going to have no problems at all. And so with all that said about the Shanling UA5, let's put that down and introduce the very last contender, which is the Questyle M15. I've been a huge fan of Questyle for quite some time. I've owned one of their QP1R portable music players, which sounded fantastic. And so I was really excited to get my hands on the M15 and see what it was all about. Now, it's not actually a red device. What they also sent me was a little red carry case here. And I should mention that I'm not entirely sure if it's included in the purchase or an additional extra. So I'll put that aside so you can see the normal unit is a little black bar unit, very similar to the FC4 in many ways, but it's a bit unique in the fact that it's got this clear front cover or top cover so you can see all the circuitry inside. The M15 retails for $249 US, and I want to say thanks to Questyle themselves for sending me the M15. Much like everything else we've looked at, we've got a USB-C socket on one end, we've got a 4.4mm and a 3.5mm on the other end. I didn't mention that on the UA5, but it's exactly the same. We don't have any volume controls on the M15, but instead we do have a gain switch. So this and the UA5 are the two that have gain levels. The rest of them don't have gain, but do have volume. Whether that's relevant, I'm going to leave up to you. I don't find it hugely relevant for dongles because I rarely use them with high impedance headphones where gain is often needed. But if you do happen to value it, it's here on the M15 and it was there on the UA5 as well. The M15 is quite an interesting device in this roundup. It sits at the top of the tree in terms of price, but it's actually one of only 2 devices in this roundup that uses a single DAC chip. So this and the Khadas Tea are both using an ES9281 chip, but only a single chip. And that is a little bit unusual for a high-end dongle with a balanced design. But what it goes to show is that Questyle, I think, are putting more emphasis on the amplification stage and the output stage, rather than pouring all of their eggs into the DAC basket. The M15 isn't vastly powerful despite being focused on amplification, but it's still got plenty of power. It's got a maximum output of 2.6 volts, and that's going to mean about 22.6 milliwatts into 300 ohms, which again is more than you're going to need for any 300 ohm headphone that I've ever come across. Now I should mention all of the maximum figures I'm giving you for these balanced and single-ended devices, the figures I'm giving you are always for balanced. Generally speaking, the single-ended output will be roughly half, so do keep that in mind if power is important and you're running a headphone or earphone with single-ended connection only. Much like most of the other dongles in this roundup, the final thing I need to mention about the M15 here is that it also handles DSD256, high sample rate PCM, and MQA. And so at this point, what you're probably starting to see is that they've all got very similar specs in the basic foundational stuff in terms of which formats they handle, so DSD, PCM, etc. But each of them has its own little feature to bring to the party. So in the case of the M15, it's all about the amplification quality. In the case of the FC4, it's all about price and power. In the case of the Khadas Tea, it's about that form factor and the Bluetooth. The UA5 has got its display and its battery isolation capabilities. And then finally, the Moonriver 2 is really probably just that it's got Cirrus Logic chips, and that probably doesn't matter too much. It's probably not a big selling card. But of course, the big question then is, do any of these things matter when it comes down to sound? So I got to fondling the dongles so I could find out. I often get asked for recommendations on the channel for specific products at specific price points. And so what I've done to help is produce this database. If you take a look at the description box in any of my videos, you'll find a section that says Passion for Sound Recommends. You might need to click the More button to see it, but it's always in the description. Clicking on the Passion for Sounds Recommends link will take you through to this database and give you a chance to see all of the different products that I've recommended over the years. The Airtable database contains a heap of information, but so that it's not overwhelming, I've set it up in such a way that you can filter it to look at just the sorts of products you're looking for. Let's say you're looking for a headphone, you can select that in the filter list and see all of the headphones that I recommend ordered by price from lowest to highest. You can also use the filter and sort buttons in different ways to better suit your searching needs, so feel free to play around with it as much as you like, it won't affect what other people can see. The idea was to make a resource for you that allows you to quickly and easily find the types of products at the budget that you're looking for. Once you've found products that you're interested in, you'll also notice that there's links next to each of the products that will take you to various retailers and manufacturers. So you might find links to places like Apos Audio in USA and Canada, or Amazon links to the USA, Australia, Canada and the UK, or global links to places like Massdrop, Linsol, Hi-Fi Go, or the manufacturers themselves such as Virum Audio, Jashelli Labs and ZMF Headphones. Some of these links are affiliate links, but certainly not all of them, and it's definitely not a criteria to get on this list. These are just products that I recommend, and whilst your support via affiliate links is always appreciated, it's absolutely not expected and also does not influence whether a product makes it onto this list. The list is always evolving, growing and changing, so do check back regularly if you're looking for something new, and I hope you find this a useful resource. For now though, let's get back to the review. As I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of my testing of these dongles using the 300 ohm ZMF Atriums. That's partly because I love the Atriums as a headphone, but it also meant I was giving them a pretty difficult load to drive in terms of the voltage required. It's also worth noting that I used the Sennheiser IE900 earphones, as well as the HiBy 3x3s, and also the T-Audio Monarch Mark II, and I've got that review coming soon, you don't want to miss that one. So in other words, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell. The way I'm approaching this review for you today is I'm going to move through a track for each dongle, and then the second dongle that comes after it will allow for some comparison. But I do want to stress that these aren't the only tracks that I've used for testing, they're just the ones that I chose to write notes on. And the first such track was Morningside by Sarah Bareilles, and had me starting with the HiBy FC4. Listening to Morningside through the atriums, the sound from the FC4 is dynamic and punchy and enjoyable. As I already mentioned, there is plenty of volume available from the FC4 because it's the most powerful dongle in this roundup. Unfortunately though, that doesn't translate to the best possible quality because the upper registers from the FC4 are just a little bit harsh, even through a smooth headphone like the Atrium. It's not that it's a bad sounding dongle overall, but you can hear that it's not the most refined sounding dongle. Things are just a little tiny bit coarse or grainy in the top end. And knowing the Atriums as well as I do, I knew that they could sound a little bit better than I was hearing from the FC4. Something the FC4 does do quite well though, is it gave me a good sense of separation of all the instruments in the soundstage, and so I was able to clearly focus on the vocals and hear all of the other backing instrumentation spread out around the soundstage. It's not an immense soundstage with huge amounts of space, but it separates all the sounds very well and allows you to hone in on the details you want to. As is often the case with any of these devices, the soundstage doesn't have a great amount of depth, but the width was solid. And so for me, for a $99 dongle, I thought we were off to a really good start with the FC4. When we get to the end of this Fondle, I am going to refer back to two dongles that I covered in the original dongle Fondle, because one of those is also $99 and therefore a direct competitor to the FC4. But for now, I wanted to move on to a new track and put the FC4 up against the Moondrop Moonriver 2. The next track in the mix was 3 Golden Trees by Frazey Ford, and what I once again heard from the FC4 was that nice general vocal quality and focus, but also that little bit of coarseness in the upper registers. Switching over to the Moonriver 2 though, still playing 3 Golden Trees, what I heard was a sound that was definitely smoother and therefore more refined, but also more articulate. It had a bit more energy and attack to it. And that doesn't mean it's harsher or more aggressive. What it means is that the leading edges of notes, so like if you think about when a guitar string is plucked, that first little moment of sound, the percussive moment where the guitar string is plucked by the finger or the pick, that's got more definition from the Moonriver 2 than it does from the FC4. It's only subtle, but it makes a big difference to the sonic experience. And so the Moonriver 2 for me is a clear and easy upgrade over the FC4, which is by no means bad, but the Moonriver 2 is a clear step up. What I also found with the Moonriver 2 was that it took the separation of sounds a step further than the FC4 did. So listening to 3 Golden Trees, I could clearly now hear the vocals, the organ, the bass, the guitar, the drums. Everything was really clearly defined in space to a greater degree than the FC4. It was still really coherent and one whole picture of sound, but each sound had its own place better defined in space. Another thing that stood out as I listened to the Moonriver 2 was the sense of bass presence. I don't think the bass was actually enhanced in any way, but by smoothing off and controlling the treble better, it allows the rest of the frequencies to be heard more cleanly, and that translated to a better sense of bass presence and bass quality. For me, having listened to both of them back to back, the FC4 is a nice, solid dongle at $99, but the Moonriver 2 is clearly the dongle that I would rather fondle out of these two. And so it was time to move on to my next test track, and that's How Long Blues by Eric Clapton. From the Moonriver 2 and still listening with the Atriums, and all of this is with the balance connection when I could. I'll cover it off when I change to single-ended, but listening to How Long Blues with the Atriums connected to the balanced output of the Moonriver 2, the sound was once again fantastic from the Moonriver 2. Beautifully defined and clear, but still refined compared to the FC4, and so I was able to hear things like the harmonica, the guitar, Eric Clapton's vocals, all beautifully defined and separated in space. Moving over to the Khadas Tea, and it was a bit of a step backwards in terms of definition. I lost some of the separation of the sounds, and things became a bit more of a single clump of music. It wasn't bad, it wasn't like it was just a one-note mess, but it wasn't as good as the Moonriver 2 had been. I feel like the treble quality became a bit more etched or a bit more edgy from the Khadas Tea, and so there was a loss of that sense of refinement that I've gained going from the FC4 to the Moonriver 2. I feel like we'd then taken a step backwards again to the Khadas Tea. It wasn't bad, and neither was the FC4, but the Moonriver 2 had it in terms of its sense of refinement and sense of separation of sounds. In comparing all three, I think the Khadas Tea sits above the FC4, but it's not quite as good as the Moonriver 2. And what I mean by that is the Moonriver 2 still has the edge in resolving capabilities, that sense of articulation and energy in the music. But the Khadas Tea just lacks that little bit of sense of space and separation, and is just a half step backwards in terms of that sense of refinement as well. And so to keep the test rolling, I found another track, and this time it was The Fire by Rag & Bone Man. And this revealed that the Khadas Tea does have a slightly crunchy sound. The quality of some of the instrumentation, and they're probably samples in The Fire, are a little bit crunchy to start with, And the combination of the recording quality or the sample quality plus the Khadas Tea was just a little bit grainy and a little bit edgy for my tastes. The tea definitely doesn't sound bad and it delivers the track very well, but in comparison to something like the Moonriver 2, you can hear that there is a little bit better sound to be had. On a positive note, I do want to mention that the Khadas Tea delivered the bass in the Fire with a nice sense of authority and body and punch to it. So it's not like it's a bad sounding device, it's very, very good. It's just not as refined as some of the others here. And speaking of refinement, the next dongle on the list was the Shanling UA5. And I talk about refinement because the UA5, remember, is the one that allows you to separate your USB data and USB power, and that theoretically should bring an extra step in refinement. What I heard as I listened to the UA5, still listening to The Fire by Rag & Bone Man, was a presentation with clearly better separation of sounds once again, perhaps not quite as good as the Moonriver 2, and we'll circle back around to that later, but it was a nice step up from the Khadas Tea. And I've just realised I forgot to mention that the Khadas Tea I was of course running single-ended. I was still driving the atriums, so with everything it was always the atriums, and I just used adapters to go from balanced to single-ended on the Khadas Tea. So moving back over to balanced to hear the UA5 at its best, as I've already said, the separation of sounds got better, but I also felt like the bass from the UA5 was maybe a little bit less authoritative. It might have been a tiny bit tighter and cleaner than the Khadas Tea, but I think the Tea had it for the sense of presence. And it's very, very subtle here, so it's not like the Khadas Tea is somehow this bassy monster, but there felt to me like there was just a really subtle shift in emphasis where the bass from the UA5 was a bit more polite, whereas it had a bit more body and weight to it from the Khadas Tea. Overall, I'd describe the sound from the UA5 as being neutral and honest and transparent, but fairly smooth as well. I was definitely able to hear more details from the UA5 that I noticed from the Tea, not so much because the Tea was lacking in those details, but because of the extra sense of separation and space, I could hear more details coming out of the mix in the UA5. And so for me, as a summary at this point, the Moonriver 2 was a clear step up from the FC4. I felt like it was a bit of a downward step, like a half step backwards for the Khadas Tea, and then it was probably close to a full half step back to the UA5, but whether or not it was better or the same as the Moonriver 2, I'm not yet sure, and I will come back around to that. Before we move on though, I do want to mention that I did test at this stage the UA5 with its various different power options, and I feel like the more power you're allowing into the device, the less refinement you get in the sound. So in other words, if you're allowing the battery to be charged during playback, but you are still using the battery, then I think it's slightly, and it's very, very slight, but it slightly reduces the sound quality. If you move over to full USB power, so in other words, you're removing the battery from the circuit entirely, then I think it's another step in refinement again, as in a step down in refinement. And so for me, I don't think it's a massive shift by using the battery, but it's definitely a benefit, and if you can, in other words, unless it's run out of charge, I'd definitely be using the battery as the power source for the UA5. And so with that in mind, let's move on to track 2 with the UA5. And that's Mardi Gras in New Orleans by Alan Toussaint. What I was hearing from the UA5 was a beautiful tonal balance and a nice sense of the harmonics from the piano. You could hear in the soundstage the piano stretching from the left to the right of the soundstage with the deeper notes on the left and the higher notes on the right, and the percussiveness of the piano, so those moments where the hammers are hitting the strings, was nicely defined but not overplayed. So things were just sounding good and natural from the UA5. Moving then to the Questyle M15, which is the last and most expensive dongle in this roundup, and what I heard was a rich and effortless sound. I got the sense that the bass was a little bit fuller from the M15 than it was from the UA5, and that came with an overall sense of tonal richness, but also effortless ease from the Questyle M15. Having said that, I felt like the M15 might also be just a little bit smoother on those percussive elements, for better or worse. And so I moved over to another track to get a better sense, something that had a bit more energy going on, and what I chose was the Ballad of Michael Valentine by The Killers. What that showed me was that the M15 is definitely a smoother presentation in a dongle. It's still got excellent separation and detail retrieval, but it just does it in a smoother way than most of the other dongles in this roundup. It's a very enjoyable sound with excellent separation and detail retrieval, but I must say, having come from the others, I was very aware that it didn't have the same sense of articulation and clarity as the others. That doesn't mean it was muddy or thick, it just didn't highlight those leading edges, those percussive moments, in the way that something like the Moonriver 2 and the UA5 did. And so that left me in a position where I really had to fondle 3 specific dongles to find out which one was my favourite. and that meant putting the UA5 up against the Moonriver 2 and the Questyle M15. I'll come back around to the FC4 and the Khadas Tea in a moment, I'm not writing those off, but I do feel like the other three were offering me a little bit more sonic engagement, and so I bounced around with all three of these using the Ballad of Michael Valentine still, and starting with the Moonriver 2, I once again heard that lovely sense of tactility and that sense of clarity that it brings, but it did take the sound into a slightly harsh territory listening to the Ballad of Michael Valentine, and so it's one of those things where the sound from the Moonriver 2 can be excellent, but it could sometimes push too far. Things like the cymbals in this track become just a little bit overbearing from the Moonriver 2, and that's even on a smooth and very easy to listen to headphone like the ZMF Atrium. Moving back to the UA5, struck a bit of a mid-balance between the Moonriver 2 and what I'd heard on the M15, which is to say it's a bit smoother, it's not as inclined to get into any harshness, but it still has a bit more separation and a little bit more clarity to it than something like the M15. And I want to quickly revisit the term clarity. I'm saying clarity in the sense of that articulation of leading edges, the sense of detail and texture in the sound. That's what I mean by clarity. It's not that the M15 is thick or muddy or lacking in detail, it just doesn't have quite that definition to the edges of notes. And that in some cases can be good, in other cases not so much. And so for me at this point it was becoming clear that there were three dongles in this roundup that I would very happily fondle, and that's the Moonriver 2, the Shanling UA5 and the Questyle M15. And so to help you with your decision making, if you're looking for a dongle to fondle, then the M15 is the one I'd go to if you like a fuller, richer sound. And to give you a sense of that, when I've been listening to the T-Audio Monarch Mark II in preparation for my review, the Monarch Mark II sounds absolutely spectacular from the M15. It's a pairing, in my opinion, made in heaven. And that's because the T-Audio Monarch Mark II does have some slightly bright and very well-defined treble, and so it doesn't need the extra clarity of something like the Moonriver 2. On the other hand, if you had a thicker, richer sounding headphone or earphone, then you might prefer the Moonriver 2 and the M15 might be too much of a good thing. And so as I've just alluded to, if you're looking for the dongle here that gives the best sense of clarity and detail and maximum separation of sounds, then that would be the Moonriver 2. It's also going to be great if you've got richer, smoother sounding headphones. And as you probably already gathered, the Shanling UA5 sits somewhere in the middle. For me, it's probably the best balance point. If you want a dongle that's going to do everything well, whether it's a brighter earphone or a smoother earphone, I think the Shanling UA5 sits nicely in the middle. I think the feature of having the battery in the power supply to take the USB power out of the audio circuit is an absolute win. It makes a really positive difference to the sound, and it's a very easy system to work with. And so for me, those are the top three I would choose out of this roundup. But I also want to mention the EarMen Sparrow. It was one of the top dongles in my original dongle fondle, and it remains one of the dongles that I most like to fondle. And sorry if you're sick of hearing that. I pulled out the EarMen Sparrow and gave it a quick listen alongside these other three, and for me the EarMen Sparrow sits somewhere between the UA5 and the Moonriver 2. And in that sense, I probably prefer it slightly to the Moonriver 2. It still has a lovely sense of clarity and detail and separation, but doesn't get into harshness quite as easily as the Moonriver 2 can on a poorly recorded track. So it's got a little bit more articulation than the UA5, but not as much as the Moonriver 2, and therefore I would include the EarMen Sparrow in a four-way roundup of the top dongles I've tried, and it's going to come down very much to your personal tastes. Do go and check out the original dongle fondle if you want to know more about the EarMen Sparrow, but for me I'm going to say Moonriver 2, EarMen Sparrow, Shanling UA5 and Questyle M15 are all excellent. As I said before though, do not write off the other two because they're not at all bad. And indeed, the Khadas Tea has definitely won a place in my heart because the ability to just slap it to the back of my phone, I bought a ring for the case on my Android phone, the ability to be able to just slap it to the back of my phone and either have a tiny USB cable or a Bluetooth connection and immediately have myself a headphone socket on my phone wherever I go, that's pretty priceless. The sound from the Tea is still very, very good, and so for me, I'm willing to trade off that little tiny bit of refinement for the convenience and the form factor of the Tea. So don't write that one off. If you do value the convenience, it's still an excellent sounding device. If you're less concerned about the convenience and you're happy to have an inline dongle, then yes, the others are slightly better in sound. And that brings me back to the HiBy FC4 as the one that I haven't addressed here. And so what I did with the HiBy FC4 was I wanted to see just how good it was for $99 US. In the original dongle fondle, one of the standouts was the E1DA9038D. It's also $99 US, and so I put that up against the FC4, and I was really impressed with what I heard. I do think the 9038D still has a slightly more refined sound, and so that's going to be my one knock against the FC4, is it is still slightly unrefined no matter how you cut it. Having said that, it provides better separation, better sense of detail retrieval and resolution than the 9038D. And that's partly because it's running balanced and it gives you that better channel separation from the two different DAC chips. And so for me, I definitely don't think you should write off the FC4. If you've got a limited budget for $99 US, it is really excellent. Just know that if you can spend a bit more, you're going to get better refinement with something like the Moonriver 2, the Shanling UA5, or the Questyle M15. And so I'm going to wrap up the main review here, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that in a moment, I'm going to continue on with a little bit of detail on a few of these dongles. And so if you're specifically interested in one of these, having heard what I have to say, then you can watch on, or you can jump forwards using the chapter markers to hear what I have to say about things like the differences between the single-ended and the balanced output on each of these devices. I don't have anything to add for the Khadas Tea because it's only got the single-ended output, and what I've said about the general sound quality carries over to Bluetooth, albeit that it's going to be slightly reduced in resolution because it's Bluetooth. But for the other four, I've got a bit more detail to share. So watch on in just a moment if you're interested, or skip ahead to find the dongle you want to know about. Before I get there though, I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope it's been useful and helpful to you. As always, I've put links down below to help you click through and buy them directly should you want to. Some of those may be affiliate links, some of them may not, I haven't checked yet. And for all the affiliate links, I deeply appreciate any and all support. If you found the review useful, I'd love it if you did subscribe, ring the notification bell, and of course, most importantly, hit that like button. Thanks for your support, and for now, I'll leave you to the music unless you're going to watch on. So happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound. If you're still here with me, it's because you want a bit more detail on one of the four dongles that I'm going to go into detail on now. And so let's jump straight into it. The first one is the Shanling UA5. So I mentioned before the quality change as you change from the battery only supply to the battery with charging supply to the USB power only supply. But the other things I wanted to touch on is the single-ended versus balanced output and also the dual DAC mode. And so the first thing is to talk about the balanced versus single-ended, and the good news is that the single-ended performance is very, very close to the balanced. The tonality of both is the same. You do lose a little bit of separation in the sound, so you lose a bit of width in the soundstage and some of the separation of instruments. But generally speaking, the single-ended output is solid. So it's not one of those dongles where I'd say don't even bother with the single-ended. It's one of those where I'd say if you can use balanced, it is better, but the single-ended is quite good. Something else to keep in mind is that the UA5 through its menu allows you to use both DACs for the single-ended output. And that closes the gap between the two outputs, meaning that the single-ended is very close to the balanced. It's still not quite as good, but it's very, very close. And so that's another check mark in the positives column for the UA5, and one of the reasons why I think this is probably the strongest dongle in this roundup, and definitely deserves its place in the top 3 with the Moonriver 2 and also the Questyle M15. Speaking of the M15 here is a little bit different to the UA5, and that's because the balanced output is significantly crisper sounding than the single-ended. It's not to say that it's clearly better than the single-ended does still sound great, but there's a definite sense of clarity and crispness from the balanced output that the single-ended is just lacking a bit. Now I should mention that it was a little bit hard to volume match quickly between the two, and it does make it hard to really define the differences when the volumes can't be perfectly matched immediately, but I do feel like the balanced output is a little bit superior and also tonally a little bit different from single-ended. So do be aware of that if you're looking at the M15. It is one of those devices where you will have a slightly different experience between the two outputs, but the good news is that both of them still sound great, just a little bit different. The next dongle I want to talk about is the HiBy FC4, and again it's to compare the single-ended and the balanced output, and I felt like once again the balanced output here also provided better separation of the sound and a better, more focused central image. Interestingly, the single-ended output from this one does help to tame some of the harshness in the top end, but it might also go a bit too far in the other direction and get a bit too thick and a bit too rich sounding. And so this is one of those occasions where I think the balanced output probably is the one to focus on using. The single-ended isn't bad, but it's a bit more of a step down compared to the balanced output than some of the other devices here. So again, do be aware of that one. This is great if you're using it balanced, maybe not so good if you're using it single-ended, and at that point, I'd probably look at the 9038D. And if you want to know more about the 9038D, check out the original dongle Fondle where I covered it in more detail. To close things off though, let's jump over to the Moonriver 2, and again talk about the single-ended versus balanced output. And the good news here is that I'd say both outputs are excellent once again. As is generally the trend, the balanced output is slightly better, it's got a slightly better sense of clarity, separation of sounds, etc. And the single-ended does come across a bit smoother and slightly less focused. So I think it is a little bit of a downgrade from the balanced output, but by no means is it bad, and this is another dongle where I'd say if you do buy it, whilst balanced is preferable, you're not having a huge sacrifice if you're using it single-ended. And so this really cements the fact that the UA5, the Moonriver 2, and the Questyle M15 are all three very, very worthy dongles in this roundup. The UA5 still comes out probably on top for me out of all of them, but they're all pretty good. And so thank you for watching on. I hope this extra detail was helpful to you. And now I'll once again leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.